My name is Arthur Miller. I am 42 years old. The warden asked why I did it, why I finally hit back, but he didn't understand that my weapon wasn't my fist. It was a single, forgotten rule buried on page 347 of the Correctional Handbook. Before we dive into the secret I've carried for all these years, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and drop a comment below guessing what the final twist will be. Now, where were we? I'm sitting in a sterile government-issue chair across from Warden Thompson's imposing desk, the polished oak between us feeling more like a mile-wide canyon. The air in here is thick, heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 bad decisions and things left unsaid. The warden has his fingers steepled, a gesture I've learned means he's trying to project calm over a situation that is anything but. His face is an unreadable mask of authority, but I can see a flicker in his eyes, a tiny spark of something that might be confusion, or maybe even fear. He wants to know why I did it. Why, after all my years of stoic professionalism, I finally hit back. The thing is, hit back isn't the right way to put it. Hitting back is an explosion. It's messy, emotional, a loss of control. What I did was the exact opposite. It was a controlled demolition. It was clean, methodical, and devastatingly quiet. I didn't use my fists, a shank, or any of the crude tools of this violent world. I used a pen, my encyclopedic understanding of prison protocol, and a reserve of patience so deep it had been mistaken for weakness. He thought he ran this block, and I used the prison's own labyrinthine rulebook to prove him wrong, to dismantle his kingdom brick by brick until nothing was left but dust. It all started 3 months ago, but the roots of it go back much further. It started not with a bang, but with a whisper in the suffocating din of the chow hall. The air in a maximum security prison has a taste. It's a coppery metallic mix of sweat, industrial-strength disinfectant, and a low, resonant hum of despair that seeps into your bones. After 15 years wearing the gray uniform of a correctional officer, you don't just get used to it, it becomes a part of you. You breathe it in, you feel it on your skin, you go home smelling of it. You see the same hollowed-out faces, you walk the same grim, echoing corridors, you run the same bleak routines day after day, year after year. You learn the rhythm of the place, the subtle cadence of its misery. And just like a sailor learns to feel the shift in the wind that signals a coming squall, you learn to feel the subtle shifts in that rhythm that tell you trouble's brewing. And for the better part of a year, the storm gathering on the horizon had a name: Silas Kane. Kane wasn't your typical inmate alpha. In a place overflowing with men who looked like they were carved from granite and rage, he was almost unimpressive. He wasn't the biggest guy, or the loudest, or the most physically intimidating. But that was his camouflage. He understood something that the muscle-bound thugs never did. Real power in prison isn't about the strength of your fists, it's about the reach of your influence. And Kane's influence was everywhere. He was serving life without the possibility of parole for a string of crimes that read like a season of a dark television drama. He had absolutely nothing to lose and all the time in the world to build his kingdom within these concrete walls. And he had. His empire was built on contraband, but not just the usual sad currency of cigarettes or homemade hooch. Kane dealt in the real currencies of modern power: smartphones, potent drugs, and, most importantly, information. An inmate with a burner phone is a king. He can coordinate with the outside world, run his criminal enterprises as if he were in a corner office, and project an aura of being completely, utterly untouchable. He had a network of eyes and ears that stretched into every cell block, every workshop, every corner of the yard. And I had long suspected that his network didn't stop at the inmate population. It stretched right into the ranks of my fellow guards. My first real, tangible taste of the scope of his operation came on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. I was doing my rounds in D Block and saw a new inmate, Peterson, a kid no older than 21, who was so terrified he seemed to be vibrating. He was standing by his bunk, which had been stripped completely bare. His mattress was on the floor, his one family photo was torn, his commissary snacks gone. "What's going on, Peterson?" I asked, keeping my voice low and even the way you learn to when you don't want to attract an audience. He wouldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on a crack in the concrete floor. "Nothing, Officer Miller. Just cleaning." I walked closer and saw the fresh purple-tinged bruise blooming on his cheekbone, poorly hidden by his downcast gaze. "Looks more like you got cleaned out," I said softly. It was a classic shakedown, a welcome tax levied by the block's ruling power. Peterson had probably just received a package from home, filled with the small comforts that make life here barely tolerable, and Kane's crew had come to collect their rent. "You need to report this, son," I told him, my voice firm but still quiet. "We can move you to protective custody. You don't have to live like this." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were wide, not with anger, but with a soul-deep terror that was far worse. "And then what?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "You think Kane can't reach me in PC? You think his guys won't find me? Reporting it just proves I'm a snitch. It puts a target on my back for the rest of my life, in here or any other prison they send me to. I'll be dead." He was right. And the most damning part was, we both knew it. Kane had created a shadow government within the prison, a system where the official rules were a joke, and his rules were law. Kane himself never got his hands dirty. That was part of his genius. He had a cadre of loyal lieutenants who did his bidding, but he loved to watch from a distance, perched on a bench in the yard or leaning against a wall, observing the chaos with the detached curiosity of a CEO reviewing quarterly reports. The other inmates were either on his payroll, living in fear of him, or foolishly trying to compete with him. And the COs? To him, we were just a nuisance, an operational hazard to be managed, manipulated, or, if necessary, neutralized. His provocations towards me started small, almost playfully. He'd noticed that I spent my break in a quiet corner of the staff room reading actual books, not just scrolling on my phone. He christened me the Professor. "Reading again, Professor?" he'd call out during count, his voice just loud enough for the whole tier to hear. "Learning any big words for us common folk?" It was a test. A simple, effective way to chip away at my authority, to frame me as an outsider, someone who didn't belong. I ignored him. That's rule number 1 in the CO handbook. Never, ever let them see they're getting to you. An emotional reaction is a victory for them. So I gave him nothing. But he was persistent. He kept pushing, probing for a weakness. One day, during a routine cell search of his bunk, a search I knew would be fruitless, he was standing at his door, watching me with a look of pure, condescending amusement. "You're wasting your time, Professor," he purred, his voice like silk sliding over a razor blade. "Can't find what isn't there for you to find." I continued my work, silent, methodical, checking under the thin mattress, tapping the walls. "You know," he continued, his tone shifting from amusement to something colder, "I heard you have a daughter. About to start college soon, isn't that right? UNC is a beautiful campus. A bit on the expensive side, though. I often wonder how a man on a state salary manages that kind of tuition." I froze. My hand, which was about to check the toilet cistern, stopped mid-air. Everything in my training, every instinct honed over 15 years, screamed at me to remain calm, to show no reaction. But he had just detonated a bomb in the middle of my carefully constructed professional detachment. Family is supposed to be the one sacred, off-limits line. This wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. He was sending a clear, unambiguous message. I am not contained by these walls. I can reach past this concrete and steel and touch the most precious thing in your world. He saw it. He saw the flash of white-hot fury in my eyes before I could mask it, and a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. He'd found the button. I finished the pointless search and walked away without a single word, my boots echoing on the concrete. But everything had changed. The unspoken truce was broken. It was deeply, irrevocably personal now. After that, his taunts became more pointed, more specific. He'd make comments about my daughter's chosen major, about the town her university was in, details he had no business knowing. He was methodically trying to get me to lash out, to throw a punch, to lose my cool in front of witnesses so he could file a grievance and have me fired or transferred. He wanted to prove to everyone, to me, to himself, that every man has a breaking point. He was right about that. He just had no idea what mine would look like. The actual breaking point, when it came, wasn't a punch. It wasn't a shouted threat. It was a quiet, almost surgical act of cruelty involving a creature that knew nothing of prison politics, a dog. Our facility had a small, underfunded program that was one of the few sparks of genuine good in the whole place. It paired carefully selected, well-behaved inmates with shelter dogs, training them to become service animals for veterans with PTSD. It was a fragile island of hope in an ocean of despair. An old-timer named Sal, a quiet man in his late 60s doing a long stretch for a crime committed in his youth, was in the program. He was a broken man, haunted by his past, shuffling through his days like a ghost. His only joy, the only thing that brought light back into his eyes, was a scruffy, endlessly optimistic golden retriever mix named Buster. Watching Sal, this quiet, defeated man, slowly come back to life while working with that dog, it was one of the few things that made you think rehabilitation might not be a complete myth. Kane hated the program. He despised anything that offered hope, because hope was a resource he couldn't control. He saw Sal's profound love for the dog not as something beautiful, but as a vulnerability, a lever he could pull to exert his power. His crew started hassling Sal, tripping him in the yard, knocking his dog's water bowl over. I wrote them up, sent them to the SHU for short stints, but it was like trying to stamp out a fire by stomping on the sparks. For every thug I had sent to solitary, Kane had 2 more eager to take their place, desperate for his approval. The final act happened during yard time on a bright, cold afternoon. I saw 2 of Kane's main enforcers, a pair of soulless brutes named Torres and Gallo, head directly towards Sal and Buster, who were playing fetch in a far corner. My gut clenched. I started moving, my hand already reaching for my radio, but they were too fast, too deliberate. One of them, Gallo, grabbed the dog by the collar while Torres held the frail Sal back, shoving him hard against the fence. Then, as Sal screamed for them to stop, Gallo forced Buster's mouth open and pushed a small, tightly wrapped packet of what I knew was drugs down the dog's throat. I was shouting into my radio, other officers were running, the yard erupted into chaos, but it was too late. By the time we got there, Buster was on the ground, his body convulsing violently. Sal was on his knees beside him, wailing, a sound of pure, animal grief that I will never forget. And across the yard, Silas Kane just watched. He stood perfectly still, his face impassive, like a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. He was showing me, and everyone else, that anything I chose to protect, anything that represented order or hope, he would destroy, simply to prove that he could. Buster didn't make it. The vet couldn't save him. Sal, utterly destroyed, was placed on suicide watch. And the dog program, the one ray of light in that suffocating darkness, was immediately and indefinitely suspended. The warden couldn't risk it happening again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my silent living room long after my wife had gone to bed, the image of Sal screaming and the memory of Kane's cold, dead eyes seared into my brain. The threats against my daughter were one thing. That was about me. This was different. This was an attack on hope itself. Kane wasn't just a criminal. He was a cancer, a void that consumed light and warmth and left only cold and darkness behind. And in that moment, I finally understood that he was right. Everyone does have a breaking point. He had finally found mine. But he was expecting a fist. He thought my breaking point would be a messy, emotional outburst that would get me fired and prove his point. He thought I'd play his game. My breaking point was a moment of absolute, ice-cold clarity. It was the calm, chilling realization that fighting him with disciplinary reports and short stints in the SHU was like using a water pistol on a forest fire. That night, sitting at my kitchen table with the first light of dawn beginning to streak the sky, I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. I wasn't going to hit back. I was going to build a cage. A cage made of paper, of procedure, of his own arrogance. A case so meticulously constructed and so utterly solid that the very system he mocked would have no choice but to erase him for me. My war against Silas Kane wasn't going to be fought in the yard. It would be fought with paperwork and patience. Kane understood the language of power that came from fear and violence. I was going to defeat him with a language he didn't even recognize as power, information and bureaucratic procedure. For 15 years, I had been more than just a guard. I had been a student of this place. I knew the delivery schedules for laundry, for food, for commissary supplies. I knew the camera blind spots and the precise moments they switched from one feed to another. I knew which officers were diligent and which were lazy, which ones cut corners, and which ones could be counted on. I had a detailed mental map of the entire prison ecosystem, its rhythms, its hierarchies, its hidden pathways. It was finally time to put it all on paper. My yellow legal pad became my unofficial, off-the-books investigation log. The obsession took hold of me completely. I divided the first page into 4 sections: the pillars of his empire, supply, communication, money, and personnel. For supply, I knew the contraband was his lifeblood. It had to be coming in through regular institutional channels, most likely supply deliveries or compromised staff. I started going back through months of logs, cross-referencing delivery dates with spikes in inmate activity, disciplinary reports, and overdoses. A faint but definite pattern emerged, clustering around the bi-weekly central linen delivery. For communication, I knew he was using a phone, but he was too smart to ever be caught with it. He had to have a secure, reliable location to use it and recharge it. I started observing his top lieutenants, not just what they did, but where they went. I noticed they spent an inordinate amount of time in the prison library, a place that offered relative privacy and a low officer-to-inmate ratio. What if it wasn't a hidden phone? What if a compromised computer terminal was his window to the outside world? Under money, I began tracking the commissary accounts of his known crew. They were always full. Money was flowing in from the outside through a complex web of small, seemingly random deposits from dozens of different friends and family. But every transaction leaves a trace, even if it's just a whispered account number on a recorded phone call from the public bank of phones. Finally, under personnel, I wrote the most dangerous piece of the puzzle. An operation this large, this sophisticated, needs help from a CO. Someone to look the other way at the right time, to facilitate movement, to feed him information about surprise inspections. And at the top of that list, I wrote a name with a large, heavy question mark next to it: Captain Evans. Evans controlled the CO duty roster. If you wanted a specific, lazy officer on the loading dock at a specific time, Evans could make it happen. He also had a long-rumored gambling problem, a classic vulnerability. But pulling at that thread was incredibly risky. Accusing a superior officer, a captain no less, without ironclad proof was career suicide. My evenings were consumed by this. I'd come home from a grueling 10-hour shift, kiss my wife, pretend to listen to her day, and then retreat to the small desk in our spare room. I'd sit there for hours, surrounded by official logs I'd photocopied, my own handwritten notes, and a map of the prison, connecting infinitesimally small dots. My wife, bless her heart, noticed the change. I was more distant, my mind always elsewhere. "Is everything all right at work, honey?" she'd ask, her voice laced with concern. "Just a complicated case," I'd lie, the understatement of the century. By day, I was Officer Miller, the quiet professor, enduring Kane's taunts with a placid expression. By night, I was an intelligence analyst, a detective, meticulously documenting every anomaly, every whisper, every glance that seemed out of place. The stress was immense, a constant pressure behind my eyes. The obsession was eating away at me, isolating me. But I knew, with a certainty that bordered on faith, that this was the only way. Kane was playing checkers, making loud, obvious, intimidating moves on the board. I was playing chess, and my opening moves would be so quiet, so deeply buried in the drone of bureaucracy, that he wouldn't even know the game had begun. The first domino was a simple observation log, a document so mundane it was practically invisible. I started noting intermittent network connectivity issues on specific computer terminals in the inmate library in my official daily reports. I didn't just report it once. I logged it every few days, varying the time, making it seem like a random, frustrating technical glitch. It was boring, it was bureaucratic, and it was completely, unimpeachably by the book. After 2 weeks, a clear pattern of documented issues from a CO was established in the system. As I knew they would, the IT department finally scheduled a full diagnostic of the library network. They weren't looking for contraband. They were looking for a faulty network card or a corrupted driver. But as part of their standard deep audit protocol for security reasons, they imaged the hard drive of the most frequently faulty machine. And there, buried deep in the system files of Terminal 4, they found sophisticated keystroke logger software and a hidden partitioning program that allowed remote access. It was a major security breach. The IT director, a man who lived for protocol, immediately flagged it to the warden. All library computer access for the entire prison population was suspended indefinitely pending a full security overhaul. I watched from the end of the hall as Kane read the notice posted on the library door. He didn't erupt. He didn't even speak. But I saw a single muscle in his jaw tighten, a small, almost imperceptible twitch. His main line of communication to the outside world, His tool for managing his finances and intimidating people on the outside had been severed. And he had no one to blame. It wasn't an attack. It was just the system. Domino 1 had fallen. The second domino was the supply line. Instead of some dramatic, anonymous tip-off that could be traced or dismissed, I used the institution's own internal channels. I noted in my official reports, over the course of a month, that a consistently less than diligent officer, a man known for taking long breaks and having a lax attitude, was always assigned to the loading dock during the bi-weekly linen delivery. This was Captain Evans's doing, I was sure of it. I then filed a formal security observation report directly to my sergeant, a straight-arrow old-timer who trusted my judgment. In the report, I didn't accuse anyone. I simply pointed out the suspicious scheduling pattern and recommended a surprise, targeted search of the next linen delivery as a procedural precaution. Because I had documented a clear, actionable pattern over time, my request couldn't be ignored. It was approved. The next time the massive linen truck rumbled up to the loading dock, it was met not by one lazy CO, but by a full search team and a dog unit. Tucked deep inside 2 industrial-sized, shrink-wrapped rolls of bedsheets, they found dozens of vacuum-sealed packages of high-end smartphones and bricks of narcotics. It was a massive haul, the motherlode. Kane's entire resupply for the next several months was gone. The driver was immediately arrested, and the linen company, a state contractor for 30 years, lost its contract that very afternoon. I saw Captain Evans arrive on the loading dock as the state police were bagging the evidence. His face was pale, ashen. He saw the contraband laid out on the concrete. He saw the state troopers, and then his eyes found mine across the chaotic scene. His gaze was full of raw panic and, more importantly, suspicion. He absolutely knew, this wasn't a random bust. But he couldn't prove a thing. I had done everything by the book. I just gave him a slow, professional nod. "Looks like we caught a break, Captain," I said, my voice flat. He just grunted and turned away, his career flashing before his eyes. Domino 2. The third domino was his crew. With his comms and supply gone, I needed to introduce the poison of doubt into his organization. My target was his primary lieutenant, a career criminal named Diaz. During a routine cell toss, an authentically random one this time, we found Diaz with a small amount of contraband instant coffee, a minor infraction. But instead of just a standard write-up, this time was different. Citing his record, I discovered this was his third minor infraction in a year. According to a little-known subsection in the disciplinary code, a third minor infraction could be elevated to a major one, triggering a formal hearing that could impact his upcoming parole eligibility. Facing a hearing that could add years to his sentence, and seeing the cracks forming in Kane's once impenetrable empire, Diaz made a pragmatic choice. He became a confidential informant, handled strictly and entirely by the book. He passed a note to me during med-call, a tiny scrap of paper hidden in a folded-up sick call request form. The note contained a list of 3 names and a location, midnight. Laundry room chute B. Following procedure to the absolute letter, I logged the information as an anonymous tip, sealed it in an evidence bag, and passed it up the chain of command to the warden's office, bypassing Captain Evans entirely. A formal, multi-team raid was organized based on the anonymous intelligence. In the dead of night, they hit the laundry room. Hidden deep inside the wall behind the defunct chute, they found Kane's entire emergency stash, more drugs, a weapon, and a ledger. More importantly, Kane knew, the moment he heard about the raid, that one of his own inner circle had flipped. He didn't know who. Was it Diaz? Was it one of the 3 men named in the ledger? The paranoia started to spread like a virus. His kingdom was no longer being attacked from the outside, it was crumbling from internal rot. Domino 3 hadn't just fallen, it had shattered his entire foundation of trust. With his communications cut, his supply chain destroyed, and his crew fractured by paranoia, Kane was a cornered animal. And a desperate man is a predictable man. I knew with absolute certainty that he would turn to his last and most powerful asset, his man on the inside, Captain Evans. This was the endgame, the part of the plan I couldn't handle with observation logs and bureaucratic reports alone. I spent an entire weekend compiling everything. My personal logs, the official reports, the informant debriefs from Diaz, the suspicious duty rosters, the timeline of events, into one single, comprehensive file. It was over 100 pages thick, a detailed, cross-reference story of a criminal enterprise and the institutional corruption that enabled it. I requested a private meeting with Warden Thompson. In his office, the same office where I now sit, I laid the entire file on his desk. I walked him through it, page by page, concluding with my carefully documented suspicions about Captain Evans. Seeing the mountain of credible, documented evidence, the warden had no choice. This was too big, too dangerous, to handle in-house. He looked at me for a long time, his face grim. Then he picked up his phone and made a call, not to prison security, but to the state's office of the Inspector General. 2 weeks later, a new CO named Ramirez showed up on D Block, a supposed transfer from a downstate facility. But I knew instantly, he was internal affairs. The warden had brought in the cavalry. Ramirez played the part perfectly. He was a disgruntled, underpaid officer, complaining constantly about the hours and the lack of respect. Within a week, Kane's remaining, desperate crew approached him. A deal was set up. Ramirez would retrieve a package from a designated staff locker and bring it into the block in exchange for a significant cash wire to his cousin on the outside. The IG's office had the entire staff locker room under covert audio and video surveillance. Warden Thompson, myself, and 2 grim-faced IG agents were in the control room, watching the grainy black and white feed. At 2 a.m., the silent feed showed a figure enter the empty locker room. The figure moved quickly, looking over its shoulder. It was Captain Evans. He opened his own locker, pulled out a black gym bag, and placed it inside the designated locker for Ramirez. An hour later, Ramirez retrieved the bag on his way to his shift and, instead of heading to D Block, walked it directly to the IG agents waiting in a nearby office. Inside was a trove of contraband. But there was something else. Taped to the inside pocket of the bag was a handwritten note from Evans, clearly meant for Kane. It read, "This is the last one. The heat is on everywhere. That bookworm Miller is sniffing around. He needs to have an accident. Soon." They had the drugs. They had the corrupt captain red-handed on video. And now, they had a written conspiracy to commit the murder of a corrections officer. The trap hadn't just sprung, it had taken off the entire leg. The takedown was swift and silent. Captain Evans was quietly escorted from his office before sunrise the next day. To the inmates and most of the staff, he just vanished. But the prison grapevine was on fire, a captain was gone, disappeared into thin air. Silas Kane was next. This was no longer a state matter. Federal agents in crisp suits came for him that afternoon. The evidence from the linen truck, the sting operation, and now the murder-for-hire plot had turned this into a massive federal conspiracy case. He was facing charges that would ensure he would never see the light of day again, likely in a supermax facility from which there was no return. As they led him away in chains, his hands and feet shackled, he passed me in the corridor. I was standing my post, my face a perfect, unreadable gray rock. The arrogant mask was gone. In its place was a look of pure, bewildered hatred. He still didn't understand what had happened. It was like a force of nature had swept through and destroyed him, and he couldn't see it. I just held his gaze until he was gone. Which brings me back here, to the warden's office, the quiet hum of the air conditioner the only sound. The file, my file, sits on the desk between us. "The IG's report is clear, Miller," the warden says, his voice low and heavy. "Your documentation was the key to unlocking this entire thing. It's a textbook case of investigative work. But you walked a hell of a line. You kept me in the dark. Why not bring this to me sooner?" I leaned back in the chair, taking a slow, deliberate breath, the first truly relaxed breath I've taken in months. "Warden," I begin, "to go after a decorated captain, a man you've known for years, I couldn't come to you with just suspicions or rumors from the yard. I needed an undeniable, unbreakable chain of evidence. I had to follow procedure to the letter, so that when the time came, the case was bulletproof. Kane was loud, arrogant, and violent. He was the symptom. But an inmate can't build an empire that large, for that long, without institutional help. The real target was always the rot in our own ranks. That final note from Evans wasn't a shock to me. It was confirmation. It was the last piece of proof I needed to bring you a case that couldn't be dismissed or buried." A long silence hangs in the office. The warden leans back, the old leather of his chair groaning under the weight of it all. He finally sees the full picture. I hadn't gone rogue. I had used the very rules he commanded me to enforce as a scalpel, to surgically remove 2 tumors at once. And I had done it so cleanly that I gave him the win while protecting the integrity of the institution from a massive public scandal. He closes the folder with a soft thud. "Officer Miller," he says, and for the first time, the mask of authority is gone, replaced by a new tone of grudging, profound respect. "Your methods are meticulous. You put yourself and your family at great risk. Don't ever carry that kind of weight alone again. You bring it to me. But, well done. Go back to your post." I stand up, give a crisp, professional nod, and walk out of his office, back into the world I know. Walking the tier later that day, the atmosphere is utterly transformed. The palpable layer of fear that always coated the air is gone, replaced by a quiet, uncertain vacuum. The inmates look at me differently now. They don't know what I did, not really. There are just whispers and rumors. They just know that their king, the untouchable Silas Kane, is gone forever, and the quiet book-reading professor is still here, walking the same beat, his face as impassive as ever. I didn't do it for revenge, not in the way Kane would understand. I did it because he and Evans had corrupted the very order I swore an oath to uphold. My response wasn't an emotional outburst of violence. It was a quiet, painstaking restoration of that order. It was a lesson, taught in the language of paperwork and procedure. The rules you think are for fools, the ones you mock and ignore, are actually the bars of a cage far stronger and more inescapable than any made of steel. They thought they were playing a game. They just didn't realize that in my world, the rulebook always wins. If this story left you speechless, smash that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, was justice served, or did I go too far? And don't forget to subscribe. You won't want to miss next week's chilling confession.